Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode, and I'm really delighted to have our guest on for today, Shaunna Lee. She's a best-selling author and podcast host. She spent nearly 20 years in corporate America. She's gone through a lot of life events, and she's got a lot of experience and wisdom for the audience to leave inspired and as well as showcase her work. So I'm happy to welcome Shaunna to the show. Welcome, Shaunna.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I know we had connected through Podmatch, and you're also a podcast host, which is really interesting. And so I love to start the fireside with, basic how you got to where you're doing, early experiences that shaped your views and into the work that you're doing now.
Oh, sure. Um, well, I think our journeys are always one step at a time. We
Mm,
ventured down the path, headed in a direction. We think we know where we're going.
mm.
And I don't know about you, but mine has never quite ended up right where I expected to be. And so this journey to podcast host and author was long and windy and lots of twists and turns. I actually ended up in my personal life. I ended up divorced for the third time and really spent some time being rather ashamed of this turn of events, we'll call it. And I, at the same time that I was kind of reeling from my third divorce, I was a single mom again. I had bought this amazing house, and I was sitting here kind of trudging my way through corporate America. And then I was let go from the company that I had been with for 5 years. And then I very quickly found myself at a startup company here in Austin, Texas. It was another technology company. I was in the cybersecurity space for the first time.
Mm.
Um, Super challenging, very small environment. It was the first time I'd been at a startup. And then 6 months later, I was again let go. So 2 times in a single year, I was let go. And I thought, okay, universe, what are you telling me? And I took some time to really do some soul searching. And what kept coming back was write a book, write a book. And I had always wanted to be an author. But the book that I was being kind of directed to write was about divorce. And this was at the same time that I was quite ashamed of the fact that I was divorced for the third time. So I thought, well, this is ridiculous. I can not at all be the person to write this book. But wouldn't you know it, that's the book I wrote. So I think the thing about our experiences is it builds us into who we are, but that's how we inspire other people. So I found myself with the realization that I was the absolute best person to write a book about building your life after divorce because I was now doing it for the third time. And I had experienced every kind of divorce that exists personally. I had the really amicable one, the World War III version where it was toxic and chaotic and terrible for the kids. And then I had this recent experience where it was a divorce. So it was emotional, but it was amicable and we were co-parenting really well. And I had learned a lot of lessons along the way. So, anyways, I put all of that into a book. It's called So You're Divorced, So What? And it became an Amazon bestseller. And that is what I built my business on. And so I now help women thrive after divorce. And my book is just, one way that I can kind of walk people through that process. I call myself the Start Again Queen. I've done it many times. I've helped many, many people do it themselves. And so then the podcast was kind of born from there. So it's called Start Again with Shaunna Lee. And what I love to do on my show is highlight stories of other people that were kind of the same, right? You're a little embarrassed of your stumbles and failures, but you actually did something and it propelled you into this new direction. And so the motto is, it's never too late and you're never too old to do the thing that's calling you. I say other things, but my podcast has an explicit rating on it. But anyways, I just get to highlight people who are doing things later in life, like starting businesses and writing books. And sometimes it's just, I say in quotes, falling in love again after divorce. So we get to talk about all sorts of really amazing things. And that's what I do.
Really fascinating journey, and your journey is very similar to a lot of people listening onto this podcast. And I remember when I was really young, you never said the word divorced, and that was kind of taboo and shame. And now you look around and it's very, very commonplace. So, these things around like getting fired, let go, divorced, all these terms are becoming more commonplace and mainstream. So, and it's great that you're able to share your experiences around that. And delving into the conversation is because you help women through this, and it, the world, I mean, if you haven't noticed, is significantly changed over the last 20 something odd years. So one question is this idea of the art of starting over, and looks like similar is you have strategies for success. How should people approach this idea of starting over? And I'm just curious because I was listening to one of my friends. He was saying, instead of getting fired, now he's firing himself. He's like, if it's not a fit, he'll just walk away. He'll just walk on. Talk about
Well,
starting over.
yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. So one of the reasons I called it starting again and not starting over was because I had this sense of, yes, I'm starting something new, but I wasn't starting over, because starting over for me implied blank slate, no experience. What I am starting with is loads of experience and all this wisdom from the lessons learned. So I thought, okay, I'm just starting something new. It works really well with the writing side of me, because I often say, we're just changing the story. We're writing a new chapter. I love all of those different kind of play on words. And so really it became this, we're starting again. And every single guest that I've had on my podcast talks about how this has been a theme in their life, right? We all done this on repeat over and over again. Whether or not you've been divorced, whether or not you've been let go from a job, you have moments of, oh gosh, okay, I'm going to start this new thing. And so that's where the starting again came from. And I've already lost the other thought that you asked me. It'll come back though.
No, like I said, I love these organic conversations, and there's no one script, and I love this idea of starting over versus starting again. And one thing is talking about is preparing yourselves for these times so you're not caught, so you're not rug pulled. And very important is if you have kids or you have a mortgage or car payment, student loans, how do you protect yourself from these very unsudden, unexpected events?
So in my life, I have always felt like it was very unexpected and I was unprepared. So I think our wisdom would tell us, okay, maybe let's start a little nest egg to prepare yourself in the future, because we know this is going to be a recurring theme. But my experience is most people are in the situation where they're caught by surprise. And so my advice usually comes more from that perspective. And I guide people that my favorite thing to say, and I just said this to a client yesterday, was baby steps are better than no steps. And one of my clients that I'm working with right now, she is struggling with kind of this pattern of depression. And people who have experiences with depression realize that there's little tells and there's signs that we're kind of slipping in that direction. And when you're like in the muck of it, some days you don't have the grandiose ability to, make big changes. And so that's where that whole idea of baby steps comes in, and that you can just make one small step in the direction of wherever you're wanting to go, because that's still forward momentum. And once you take one step, then you'll get another step. And that's where the momentum really starts to build, and you can then build your confidence. And the thought did come back to me, by the way, your friend who said he is firing himself. And I love that, because it's along these lines. So I coach a lot of people through the dating scene after divorce as well. And one of the things that we have to do is shift the perspective. And it's not about me waiting to be chosen or me waiting for a company to decide if I get to stay with them or not. It's about whether or not I'm choosing to stay at the company. It's about whether or not I'm choosing to go on a second date. And I think when we put ourselves in that perspective where we are the chooser and we are the one deciding, that's so empowering for people, and it changes the whole perspective. So I love that your friend said that.
Yeah, which brings me to this next question, which I've seen quite often is people will either quit their job or they'll get let go, and then they'll be desperate to land into another job, just any job that they'll, and then it's very similar to relationships. It's like I've noticed, a lot of my colleagues and friends, they'll suffer a divorce or breakup, and then they'll just, they'll make the same mistake because they're just rushing. So talk about this idea of choosing and just kind of being okay with, solitude and versus being
Mhm.
alone with yourself, and how you can help yourself grow during those times so you can attract the right company or job or business or partner.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, this fear of the unknown, which is really what that is, right? There's a fear of being alone, I think, for people in that dating scenario. Um, but this fear of the unknown and this uncertainty, one of the things that I've learned and I've coached my clients through is sitting in a phase of being uncomfortable.
Mhm, mhm,
We are not taught or trained to be uncomfortable. We're it's the opposite, actually. And so what I encourage people to do is just sit with what feels uncomfortable. The idea of being alone, the idea of not having a job for, let's say, a month. Just pick a time frame and you just sit with what is uncomfortable. Why is it uncomfortable? What is the fear that comes up? I'm a huge fan of journaling. And so that's kind of the tool that I use to kind of work through uncomfortable feelings. I think it's hugely enlightening when we can be self-aware enough to look at what makes us uncomfortable and what is the fear that's underneath that. Because what comes out of that is the direction your soul is calling you to, usually. And so almost always. And so that's where I'm always like, okay, well, let's just sit in being uncomfortable for a second. What does that mean? And I would say, the most important question that every situation in life always comes back to, and if you can answer this for yourself, it will guide your direction, whether it's dating, marriage, company, whatever. What do you want? And if you can sit in the uncomfortable feelings of uncertainty and not knowing what the fears that bubble up, and then be like, okay, but what do you want?
mhm.
That will put you on the path to a much more fulfilling career, a much more fulfilling relationship. And I always encourage people to do this relationship assessment after a relationship has ended, because there's a lot of value that comes out of really sitting with, what did I do well in this relationship? What did I do well at that company? What could I have improved on? And that, I think, helps people determine, what do you want moving forward as well.
And we'll talk about healing in the next segment. And I wanted to touch upon this idea which you were talking about is when you were journaling or meditating and assessing, a lot of kind of this idea of mainstream where you're supposed to be married, have kids, white picket fence versus this idea of
Mhm.
being single and focusing on your career, or maybe not even having kids. And so talk about this dichotomy and how some people they're meant to follow this kind of mainstream narrative, and others are here to start their businesses or just kind of go against the grain and not fit into the traditional mold.
It's interesting because I was just having this conversation with my 11-year-old recently. She's very, very concerned with what people think about her. And I was explaining to her this concept of midlife crises.
Mhm.
And she was like, I don't know what you're talking about. But my theory is that the reason we get to midlife and we see people who want to just blow up their life and make all these crazy choices, it's because they've been ignoring their whole life what really makes them happy and what they really want. And so then, yeah, it looks crazy that, the most typical one is the man who gets a divorce and dates the younger girl, and then, buys the sports car or whatever, like, crazy thing that goes against what we've been taught is the 1, 2, 3. This is the path to life. I think it boils down to this.
Mhm.
We
Mm.
all get to midlife and we've followed the recipe we were given. We go to school, we build the career, we have the children, and we get to, the stage where we're like, okay, we did all the things. Why am I not happy? And that, I think, is what is at the crux of it, is that we aren't following our passion. We aren't following our bliss because we're told that knitting cannot build a career. Knitting is my example because I love to knit. But you can't go to school to be a knitter and build a career and all that. But if you really look at it, there are plenty of people online who are making money because they love to knit. And so it's like, oh, hold on a second. I've been ignoring this thing I love this whole time because I thought it wasn't along the recipe. Anyways, that's my theory.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And now there's quarter life crisis and there's kind of like midlife.
Yeah, because I think these younger generations are figuring out a lot sooner than we did. They're calling BS on the recipe a whole lot sooner. Now we see this quarter life crisis. It's interesting.
Yeah. Talk about healing and especially people that's been suffered these life changing events. How can people start to heal? You talked about journaling, meditation, spending time alone. How can people just and then figure out what you really want? What are some techniques for healing?
Healing is an interesting thing. It's so necessary for everyone, but it's not like we wake up one day and we're like, okay, that's it. I'm healed. I'm done. It's an ongoing process that is always, how Shrek says there's many layers. He's like an onion. That's what I think healing is like. There's many layers that you can heal. One layer from your divorce. You can heal another layer from a childhood wound. And then just new ones keep popping up. So I think if I were to give advice on the healing process, I think the first thing that people can start to do is just look in the mirror and do some self-reflection. And, I'm not familiar with the AA 12 steps, but I know part of that process is that you actually look at how you've harmed people, or you look at what your responsibility was in certain situations. And I think if people start there, it will uncover where you have to heal. I think relationships are a really great example. You were talking about the patterns where people will get out of one relationship and jump into another one. Well, when people do that, they're not taking the time to heal whatever was bubbling up in that last relationship. My favorite thing to say is, whatever you haven't healed, whatever that issue is, if you don't heal it, it's going to walk in the door in a new set of pants. Like, it's just going to come back for you to heal it. We get the opportunity over and over again until we do it. And so I think, self-reflection is really important. And that's why I always recommend journaling, just because it can be this time where you answer one question every morning and you just kind of work through, what was I thinking about that? Where am I leading? What do I want in life? Like, one of my freebie offers that I have for people is journal prompts. And I call it Journal Yourself to Joy, because it really is just answering a question a day and working yourself through what is actually going to make me happy. But I think healing is just this ongoing process. I think therapy is amazing. Meditation is amazing. It gives you the opportunity. Meditation is really great. Like, you can sit in meditation and have different purposes. Like, one day it can be forgiving a person who's wronged you. The next day it can be visualizing this new life you're building. It can be used in a lot of different ways, just like journaling. And then therapy. I'm just a big proponent of therapy because I think everybody should go to therapy.
Yeah. It's like a coach, and even the top athletes, they have coaches.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Fascinating talk. And how can people check out your work and your book, and as well as your podcast? You've got a Start Again podcast and your book.
Oh, yeah. All the things. So my podcast, Start Again with Shaunna Lee, is on all the places that you would listen to a podcast. My website is a great place to go and learn about any one of my offers at the time at ShaunnaLee.com. And one of my favorite ways to introduce myself to people is for them to, when you're encountering this situation where you're like, oh no, I have this new thing I need to do and I think I'm too old to do it, I've got a start again guide that will walk you through some baby steps to build your plan. And that is available on my website as well. It's Shaunna Lee start again guide. Or they could just send me a message on any of the socials. I'm at simply Shaunna Lee.
And for the audience, let's thank Shaunna for coming on, and be sure to give her a like and follow on all of her socials. Check out her podcast, check out her book, especially these times. And with that, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.